Welcome to our deep dive. We've got a special one planned just for you guys, the parents of our awesome students at Coego's STEAM Plus Language School over at the Kadena Youth Center.
Yeah, it's so cool to have you all join us as we kind of peek into what your children are up to in our STEAM course.
They're so excited to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about projectile motion.
Bringing the excitement of science and engineering, right into the classroom. And today we're taking a deep dive into projectile motion.
Exactly. And your kids are really getting hands-on with this stuff. I mean, they're building and testing their own 3D printed catapults.
Yeah, and they're launching these adorable little turkey projectiles.
It's so much fun to watch.
It really is quite a sight, and they're learning some pretty important scientific principles along the way.
I bet they are having a blast. So for our parent listeners, can you maybe break this down a little bit? What exactly is projectile motion and why is it so important?
Well, projectile motion is basically the study of how objects move through the air when they're, thrown, launched, or propelled in some way. So think about throwing a ball, hitting a golf ball, even the spray of water from a garden hose.
Oh, yeah.
It's all projectile motion.
It's everywhere.
It's something that we see and experience every single day, but we might not always realize the science that's behind it.
I know, I definitely don't.
And understanding these principles can really help us to predict and control how objects move, which is important in a lot of fields, from sports to engineering.
Okay, now to guide our exploration today, we're going to be using a YouTube video as a starting point, and it's called Introduction to Projectile Motion.
It's a great video.
It breaks down some of the core concepts that your children are learning in the STEAM course.
Yeah, it's a really helpful visual aid to help us grasp some of these ideas that sometimes seem a little counterintuitive.
Okay, cool. So let's jump right in. One of the first things that the video highlights is that the motion of a projectile can be broken down into two parts: horizontal and vertical motion.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that these two components are independent of each other. They don't affect each other.
Wait, really? I'm not sure I quite get that.
Okay, so think of it this way. Gravity only affects the vertical motion of an object. It's constantly pulling everything down towards the Earth, but it doesn't really care about how things are moving sideways.
Oh, so the horizontal speed of a projectile doesn't change the fact that gravity is pulling it down at the same rate.
Exactly. That's a key point because it explains why, for example, a ball thrown horizontally will hit the ground at the same time as a ball dropped straight down from the same height.
Really? I would have thought the thrown ball would take longer to land.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but it's true. Because both balls are being acted upon by gravity in the same way, regardless of their horizontal speeds. The video actually has a really good visual of two balls being released simultaneously. One dropped straight down and the other one launched horizontally, and they both hit the ground at the exact same time.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm starting to see how understanding these concepts can really change how we see the world around us.
Absolutely, and that's what's so cool about the STEAM course. It's giving your kids the tools to think critically about the world and see the science that's at play in everyday things.
The video also mentions that projectiles follow a curved path called a parabola. I can picture it in my head, but can you explain what causes that shape?
Sure. So the parabolic path is a direct result of the interplay between the horizontal and vertical components of motion that we just talked about. Remember, gravity is constantly acting on the projectile, pulling it downwards.
Right, but the horizontal motion is constant.
Exactly. And because these two motions are happening at the same time, the projectile ends up following this, graceful, curved trajectory, the parabola. It's almost like a dance between gravity and the object's momentum.
I love that.
Yeah.
And the video actually shows how the vertical speed of the projectile changes over time as it goes up, slows down, stops at its highest point, and then falls back down, all while the horizontal speed stays the same.
Yeah. Right. And that moment at the top when the projectile pauses in the air for just a split second, that's where the vertical velocity actually becomes zero for a moment before gravity starts pulling it back down.
Wow, so cool. So in the STEAM course, the kids are experimenting with projectile motion, using those catapults and turkeys. Are they actually exploring these same ideas?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're doing their own mini physics experiments to see how different things can affect the way their projectiles fly.
So it's more than just launching the catapults. It's really about understanding the science behind it.
Exactly. And one of the things they're learning about is how the angle they launch their turkeys at affects both the distance the turkey travels and also the shape of its path.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It is. They're discovering that a steeper angle sends the turkey higher in the air, which gives it more airtime, but it might not go as far horizontally.
Right. So it's all about finding the sweet spot between height and distance.
Exactly, and they're learning that there's this optimal angle for getting the most distance, an angle that gives the best balance between the horizontal speed and the time it spends in the air. The video mentions that it's usually around 45 degrees.
So they need to experiment with their catapults to try and find that perfect 45-degree angle.
That's right.
This is so cool. It sounds like they're really getting a deep understanding of projectile motion. And it's amazing how these ideas can be taught in such a fun and engaging way.
Absolutely.
So we talked about launch angle, but what about the weight of the projectile? Does that make a difference?
It definitely does. But it might not be as simple as you might think. Let's say we have two turkeys launched from the catapults at the same angle with the same force. One's made of a lighter material and one's a bit heavier.
Yeah.
Which one do you think would fly further?
I think I'd say the heavier one because it seems like it would have more momentum.
That's a really common assumption. But you have to remember that in a perfect world without any air resistance, both turkeys would actually travel the same distance. It's the air resistance that makes things a bit more complicated in the real world.
Okay, how does it work?
So air resistance is like a force that pushes back against objects as they're moving through the air. And the lighter the object, the more it's affected by this. So even though both turkeys are launched with the same force, the lighter one is going to slow down quicker because of the air resistance.
So the heavier turkey can kind of push through that air resistance better.
Exactly. And that's why usually a heavier object will go further than a lighter one when they're launched with the same force and angle. Of course, things like the shape and size of the object also matter, but that's a whole other topic.
That makes sense. Bet the students are loving testing this out with their catapults.
They are. They get to use different materials to make turkeys of different weights, and then they can observe how each one flies when it's launched. They're like little scientists testing their hypotheses and making conclusions from what they see.
Wow. It's amazing how hands-on learning can make these concepts so much more real and understandable. It's not just about reading from a textbook. It's about seeing the science in action.
I agree. And it gets even better because they're using some really cool digital tools to take their learning even further.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, they're using Kahoot quizzes to test what they know about projectile motion. It's a really fun and interactive way to learn, and it's like a friendly competition that helps them remember what they've learned.
I love Cahoots.
Yeah.
It's such a great way to make learning fun. And I'm sure the kids love it too.
Oh, yeah, they do. But there's more. They're also using a catapult game in Roblox to experiment with projectile motion virtually. It's a great way to see how all the different variables we've been talking about affect the way things fly.
Wait, a catapult game in Roblox? That sounds amazing. Can parents play too?
Definitely. It's a really fun way for families to learn and connect together. You can even have competitions to see who can launch the projectile the furthest or hit a target.
Now that's what I call family fun, with an educational twist. It sounds like Coego is doing a fantastic job making STEAM learning fun and accessible for everyone.
We really believe that learning should be an adventure, and we want to equip our students with the knowledge and skills they need to explore the world around them confidently and with lots of curiosity.
Well said. So we've talked about launch angle and weight, but what about spin? Does that play a role in projectile motion too?
Oh, yeah, spin. That's where things get really interesting. Spin can actually make projectiles curve, dip, and even rise in ways that seem to defy gravity. It's often overlooked, but it's a crucial part of how things fly.
Wow, this is getting really exciting. I can't wait to learn more about how spin affects those cute little turkey projectiles.
Well, then you'll have to stay tuned for the next part of our deep dive where we unravel the mysteries of spin and its impact on projectile motion.
Hup.
You might be surprised by what you learn.
I'm ready for it. Stay tuned, everyone, as we explore the fascinating world of spin and projectile motion.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. It's awesome getting to chat about how these science ideas can be made so exciting for young learners.
I know, right? Seeing how these concepts come to life in the Coego STEAM course is seriously inspiring.
It really is.
We were talking about launch angle and how it could affect the way a projectile flies, but what about the weight of the projectile itself? Does that matter?
Oh, absolutely. But it might not be as straightforward as you'd think.
Oh, how so?
Let's say we have two turkeys launched from those catapults at the same angle and with the same force. One's made of a lighter material and the other's a bit heavier. Which one do you think would fly further?
My gut says the heavier one. It just seems like it would have more momentum, you know?
That's a pretty common thought, but it's important to remember that without air resistance, they would actually both travel the same distance. It's the air resistance that makes things a bit trickier.
Okay, so how does air resistance play into this?
Think of it like a force that pushes back against anything moving through the air. The lighter something is, the more it's affected by this pushback. So even though both turkeys are launched with the same force, The lighter one is going to slow down faster because of the air resistance.
So the heavier turkey can kind of plow through that air resistance better.
Exactly, and that's why usually a heavier object will travel further than a lighter one when they're launched with the same force and angle. Of course, other factors like the shape and size of the object also affect air resistance, which is a whole other fascinating thing to explore.
Totally makes sense. I bet the students are having a blast testing this out with their catapults.
Oh, yeah, they are. They're using all sorts of different materials to make turkeys of different weights, and then they get to see how each one flies when it's launched.
Oh.
They're essentially becoming mini physicists, testing hypotheses and drawing conclusions from what they observe.
That's incredible. Hands-on learning like that really makes these ideas so much more real. It's not just about memorizing facts from a textbook. It's about seeing the science in action.
Absolutely. And to make things even more exciting, they're using some really cool digital tools to take their learning to the next level.
Oh, digital tools. Tell me more.
Well, for one, they're using Kahoot quizzes. It's a really fun way for them to test their knowledge of projectile motion. It's interactive and kind of like a friendly competition, which helps them remember what they've learned.
I love Kahoots. It's such a great way to make learning fun, and I'm sure the kids love it too.
Oh, they absolutely do. But that's not all. They're also using a catapult game in Roblox to experiment with projectile motion in a virtual world. It's amazing for visualizing the concepts and seeing how different variables affect the trajectory of the projectiles.
Wait, a catapult game in Roblox? That sounds awesome. Can parents play this game with their kids?
Absolutely. It's such a great way for families to connect and learn together. You can even challenge each other to see who can launch their projectile the furthest or hit a certain target.
Okay, now that's what I call family fun, with an educational twist. Koigo's doing amazing work making STEAM learning so engaging and accessible for both kids and parents.
We really believe that learning should be an adventure. And that's why we want to give our students the knowledge and tools they need to explore the world confidently and with tons of curiosity.
I love that. So we've covered launch angle and weight, but what about spin? Does that have any effect on projectile motion?
Ah, spin. That's where things get super interesting. Spin can actually make a projectile curve or dip or even rise in ways that seem to defy gravity. It's a factor that often gets overlooked, but it's really important for understanding how things fly.
It's getting me so excited. I can't wait to hear how spin affects those adorable little turkey projectiles.
Well, then you'll want to stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive. We'll be unraveling the mysteries of spin and how it impacts projectile motion. You might be surprised by what you learn.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and I'm super ready to tackle this whole spin thing. It sounds like it's the key to becoming a projectile motion master.
You know, it really adds a whole new layer to the way we think about objects moving through the air. It's not just about launching something with a lot of force at a certain angle. It's about understanding this invisible force that can make a projectile curve dip or even rise in unexpected ways.
Like physics has a few magic tricks up its sleeve. But how does spin actually work? What's the science behind it?
Well, it all boils down to air pressure and how spin interacts with the air flowing around a moving object. Let's imagine one of our turkey projectiles spinning as it flies through the air.
Okay, got it. I'm picturing a little turkey twirling through the air. What happens next?
As it spins, it creates a difference in air pressure on opposite sides of the turkey. On one side, the spin is working with the airflow, smoothing things out and creating an area of lower pressure.
Okay, so one side has lower pressure because the spin is making the air flow more smoothly.
Right.
What about the other side?
On the other side, the spin is actually going against the airflow, causing more friction and turbulence, which creates an area of higher pressure.
So now we have low pressure on one side and high pressure on the other. And nature likes to balance things out right. So what happens next?
Exactly. Air naturally wants to move from high pressure to low pressure to try to even things out. This means that the spinning turkey is getting pushed in the direction of the lower pressure. It's like an invisible hand guiding it along that curved path.
So if the turkey's spinning clockwise, it'll curve to the right because that's where the low pressure is.
Exactly. And if it's spinning counterclockwise, it'll curve to the left. It's pretty cool.
Right.
The students in the STEAM course are actually testing this out themselves by adjusting their catapults to launch their turkeys with different spins.
I bet it's so much fun to see those turkeys curving and dipping through the air. They're like unlocking the secrets of flight.
It really is amazing to watch them make those connections between the science they're learning and how their projectiles behave in the real world. And that's what the STEAM course is all about, empowering students to think critically, experiment, and apply scientific principles to solve problems and have fun doing it.
I couldn't agree more. And by giving them these hands-on activities and introducing them to tools like that Roblox catapult game, we're helping them develop a love for science and giving them a strong foundation in STEM that will benefit them for years to come.
Absolutely. Who knows? Maybe some of these students will grow up to be engineers, physicists, or inventors and use their understanding of projectile motion to create incredible new things.
That would be amazing. It's
Yeah.
exciting to think about all the possibilities when we encourage a passion for science and discovery in young minds. Well, we've reached the end of our projectile motion journey, and I have to say I learned a ton.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you and sharing these insights with all the parents listening.
I hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what your children are learning in the COEGO SCHEME course, and maybe even sparked a little curiosity about the wonders of physics in yourself.
We encourage you to continue these conversations at home. Ask your kids questions, experiment together, and keep that spirit of exploration alive. After all, learning is an adventure that never ends.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you all for joining us on the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.